Now we're going to pay our attention to the front of the field, and Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull have all visually come up with very different concepts for their 2019 Chargers. So I'm joined by Giorgio Piola and Gary Anderson to make sense of it all. And guys, let's start with you, Gary. Just how different are these cars to last year?
Well, they're very different in the treatment of the aerodynamics around the front wing. It's just about trying to change the flow of the front wing so the cars aren't so dramatically affected in traffic. And they've taken away all these turning vanes that turn the airflow around the outside of the front tyre. A couple of different concepts. Ferrari have got a very swoops downwards as it goes to the end plate front wing, so there's very little in front of the front tyre. Mercedes are more conventional in their flap arrangement, goes out pretty horizontal, so again they've got flaps in front of the front tyre. One of them's probably right, but I think because of all the changes the difference is actually quite minuscule. Red Bull are more in the direction of the Mercedes, so interesting to see who comes up with what and when.
And Giorgio, you've had a little bit of time to compare Mercedes and Ferrari to last year. What would you say are the key differences there?
Yes, what is very interesting, as Gary said, that this year finally we have different solutions, so it's quite a gamble to understand which one is right. I'm impressed very much by Mercedes. They made a big work in reducing the size of the nose cone, so the width of the car is very narrow, so very good for the airflow to the back, to the side pods at the back of the car. While Ferrari seems to have concentrated on quite a traditional front end compared to last year, but a big massive work on cooling efficiency, so the side pods are very narrow, the engine cover is very low, so they must have done a big work under the bodywork.
Now, we've also had a look at the barge boards and other associated areas. A bit of change in that area, but they're still pretty complex. Gary, what do you make of the whole situation there?
Well, they are probably the most complex part in the car now. Again, Ferrari and Mercedes, just a little bit of a different concept in the way they're trying to make it work. But still, you know, the end result is more or less the same. It's all about pulling that airflow, as Giorgio says. You want to get as much airflow in between the front wheels as possible underneath the car, and then you pull that airflow around with the barge board and introduce it to the leading edge of the underfloor. So they've both got slightly different concepts, but the end result is very similar. Lots of little turning vanes, lots of vortex generation, but it's just about making sure all that keeps working, because when you get in traffic behind another car, if you've got a really intricate airflow structure, it's very easy for it to fall down and just not work for you. So the complication's still there because the result of more downforce is still there, so people just pursue it.
And would you say that compared to last year, perhaps the barge boards are a little bit more important, or with the change in front wing size? Or
they've always been very important. I mean, way back in the old days when the barge board was just, as it arrived, a barge board, it was probably something like 10% of the downforce of the car was generated by the airflow regime that the barge board created. So now it's probably quite a lot more than that, 15 or 16%. The change on it, making it a little bit smaller than that, will be a little hit, but it's not really that dramatic because it's just the height they've changed, and really all the complication and the flow is down around the bottom of it.
And Giorgio, you've also had a little bit of a look at the Red Bull. A little bit of a different philosophy to Mercedes and Ferrari. What do you make of the design so far?
Red Bull went on their philosophy of different shape of the bodywork, especially what we call usually the Coca-Cola shape. Everybody has tried to have a big undercut in the low section, but Red Bull has a completely different shape, and they went on this direction. They went very extreme on this car, so again there will be a big gamble with the engine, with the Honda engine. Until now was not very reliable, so we have to see in an extreme car if it will be reliable. I hope so, because we need to have three teams competing very strongly.
Now, Gary, you've been casting your eye over the testing action so far. What's your main takeaways from the runs so far?
To be honest, it's so difficult to actually really know what's going on because of the different fuel loads that people run. But you can only look at the car on the track and the sort of consistency and the stance of the car on the track, how often they can, really hit the apex of the corners and how consistent the car is, basically. And they all look good. I'd say the Mercedes has probably got a little bit more understeer than the Ferrari, just in the as a general thing. This morning, for sure, looking at it again, you could see it had a bit of understeer. The Ferrari is very consistent. I think that going out of your three teams, the Haas is very stable, especially through the turn 9 here. It's a blind over the top of a hill, right-hand corner very fast, and it's just really, really well planted there. So I think there's still a lot to come. It's day 3 of the test, and there's 5 more days as such to go. So we haven't really seen the true performance yet, but some pretty good cars out there.
Definitely. And Giorgio, lastly, you've been keeping your eyes open in the pit lane. Are there any points of interest that you would say?
Yeah, every year there is always some surprise. This year, for example, the end plate of the rear wing of the Renault is completely different from everybody else. And then we have to see all the tricky little parts. Is always more complicated because, as Gary said, of course, you have to compensate the loss of downforce from the front wing. So for sure, the barge board area this year will be even much more important than last year.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you. And for all of the testing action, join us on autosport.com and motorsport.com and follow our fantastic Autosport Live coverage for more.